The All-Star race has been used for experimentation before, like the double file restart, which was such a hit that it moved into a regular part of the NASCAR race and has been working great ever since. This year, the All-Star race at North Wilkesboro is going to be a good test session for using softer tires. They've announced that each team will have, for the All-Star race, will have 2 sets of regular tires and 2 sets of what they're calling option tires. Now, the option tires are going to be slick tires, but made with the same rubber as the wet weather tire, making it a softer tire with more grip and faster wear. Each team for the All-Star race itself will have to start on the option tire. Now, NASCAR is not saying, Holly, how long they have to run that tire or if they have to run the second set of option tires. But for all the criticism that the short track package has been getting, this is going to bring tire management like we saw at Bristol this year, purely by accident. This is going to bring tire management into the gameplay, I think. And I think, I'm fine with this, to use this as an experiment.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, and that they have been able to use the All-Star race to try out formats, different things like that, to see how it would go in the regular season. And I think what we're seeing with the tires for what they've just announced for the All-Star race this week, that's definitely going to be it. And, it's a great opportunity for teams to do things that they don't have to worry about points or anything like that on the line. So I think that this is a welcome opportunity to not just do like a tire test, but to be racing with them and see what that is. And so I think it really presents itself as something good. I think the teams will be excited about, and who knows what's going to happen. And that's what makes the race so good.
Dustin, could this be the answer to the short track package to improving the short track racing?
It's a step, and whether it will or not, we'll see. But again, it's you're encouraged by the fact that NASCAR, Goodyear, the drivers, everybody's willing to try something. And look, and the drivers have said, let's do something. We've got to soften up the tire. Like the drivers are talking about more horsepower. That's not going to happen. So, okay, what's the next option? It's the tire. What can be done? We've heard that, Goodyear, even last year they were looking at ways to, lack of a better term, soften the tire or to make them wear a little bit more. And this is being a little bit more aggressive on it. And that's what drivers have said is like, let's just really go after it and see what we get and how that can help moving forward. Now, again, I think what's interesting is just that, North Wilkesboro is a repave, and typically at repaves you kind of have more of a single file type of racing. Now maybe you'll still continue to see that, or will this help that in any way, or will you have comers and goers because some people are on the option tire and it wears quicker, and once those wear, that those on the primary tires, which are not as fast off the start to make their moves, then you can have passing that way. It's just trying to find ways to create where there's some action, where there's things where cars can move and drivers feel like they can have a hand in where they finish. It's like, I mentioned earlier with Talladega, is just, people talk about the fuel savings, like, hey, let's figure out how to make the cars pass or where drivers can make some moves. That's the same thing here with the short track. And I think with, looking at this and this, obviously there's a lot of hope. Now, look, we've been around long enough, and we were talking earlier, we've known that, at Charlotte, they tried it one year at the All-Star race, and it, they had a different compound, and it was effective when they practiced during the day when in warmer conditions. And I think it was a 3/4 of a second difference between the softer tire and what was the regular tire. But then when you raced the All-Star race that night, and it was in cooler conditions, that gap was more like a tenth or something like that. It wasn't as significant, so it did not have as big of an impact. But again, you've got to try things to learn that. I think, I'm hopeful that the fans are appreciative that the sport's trying something and understand that, hey, this may be the most spectacular All-Star race, and if so, that would take a lot because there have been some pretty good ones, or it just may be a race, and so be it. But I think this is a step forward. The first step was to figure out how to move forward. Now the sport's looking at tires, and I think the second step is now let's see what happens. What do you take from this? This is a good learning experience. Can this be taken forward to some other tracks later in the season, potentially? Again, there's some short tracks in the playoffs. What if this works out so well that, you could use this at a Martinsville, and now you have two different tire options, and now, with 100 to go or 50 to go or 75 laps to go, there's a caution. Now what tires are you putting on? It's not like, hey, I got to stay out for track position because it's hard to pass. It's like, okay, we got to come in, but now what tire are we going to take? And that might be the difference. And again, it's adding all these different elements. It's adding the team aspect, but it's also potentially giving more control to the drivers to allow them to be able to make some moves, which right now they're saying they're not able to do as much. So, look, it's a great opportunity to try something on a non-points race, and let's see what happens. And if it works well, then okay, let's start bolting them on some other bolting them on the cars at some other tracks. Let's Goodyear start cranking up the tire factory.
Well, Holly, I often said one of the big challenges in testing, period, is that you're going out there and testing with 4 cars, 5 cars. The All-Star race gives you an opportunity to go out there with 20 cars, for instance, 25 cars. That's where you're going to get a better feel for how it's going to affect the aerodynamics and things like that. To me, this is a great opportunity to do testing, more realistic testing than you're doing in just a tire test or a 4 or 5 car test, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I was saying. I mean, because you are surrounded by more cars, and the difference also being with a high motivation of trying to win the race and to immediately get a hold of what we need to do to make the tires right. So I think this is a great thing that NASCAR has thought of to do this. And, they're able to try something to increase competition in an event where the competition is going to be there because of it being an all-star situation. And I really think it kind of bodes well for everybody.
One of the things that they're talking about, it's a 200-lap race. There will be 2 cautions during the race, scheduled cautions, lap 100 and lap 150. And at the lap 100 break, Dustin, teams must perform a 4-tire pit stop using any tire of their choosing.
So again, that's putting it in the crew chief's hands at that point of like, what do you want to go with? And do you want to go with that softer tire that in theory should be faster, but it's going to wear? So, and you were going to say, is that there's a caution at 150 and you don't, you're not required to pit. So then do you come in at 100 and say, hey, we're going to put the soft tires on. We know there's a caution at 150 and we'll come back in and change tires at that point. Or do you say, hey, let's forget about lap 100 and let's go put the softer tires on lap 150, depending on how it plays. I like the idea that it adds a little intrigue. It's just like this past weekend's race with Talladega is, and I know the fuel savings may be something that bothered some people, but the idea of in that third stage where, the Toyota cars that were further in the pack, and realistically it was going to be very difficult for them to move up through the field. So what did they decide to do? They decided to come in as a small group and pit ahead of time once they got in their fuel window to make it to the end of the race. And now you have this whole idea, which, it forced the pack to react, and had the Toyotas not wrecked, it would have been fascinating to have seen how it's played out. Now, it still played out well for Toyota because that caution proved helpful because, Reddick, Truex, and Ty Gibbs, who'd already pitted and weren't involved, weren't damaged in that wreck, they were able to kind of go up to the front of the field, for that caution when everybody else came in and put themselves in a good position. And that led to, contributed to Tyler Reddick's win. So the idea that a crew chief now has to make that decision on, do we pit here? What tire do we put on? Do we save that last set for 150 for that option tire? I think that's fun and exciting, and that'll add another element. And again, hey, think about this. You're the crew chief, and you're making a decision that could cost your team or win your team $1 million. The $1 million decision. How much pressure is there on that?
Yeah, an awful lot. My favorite rule here, Holly, on this list of rules, and they put this in here because if they didn't put this in here, somebody would have tried it. All 4 tires on the car must be of the same type at all times. Somebody would have tried it if they didn't put it in there, right?
Exactly. They know these guys too well.
You got to cover everything, Dustin.
Well, it just reminds me one year of the All-Star race with Jeff Burton. Didn't he win a segment with Frankie Stoddard on how they pitted right before the end of the segment, and it was they had to do their
rolled
pits,
across the
and they just rolled across the line on pit road, and so it was a brilliant call by Frankie Stoddard, the crew chief for Jeff Burton, and then like the next year there was a rule written, you can't do that, and they're going to close pit road and things like that. So so these guys are going to come up with something, and sometimes NASCAR catches it ahead of time, and sometimes NASCAR has to react.
Yeah, they will also have qualifying will be taking place for this race. It will include a pit stop. Total time will help determine the pole sitter.
So you got the pit crews.
Pit crews will be involved.
Yep.
There'll be 2 heat races that will set the lineup. A 100-lap All-Star Open, and then the 200-lap main event. And you'll have the fan vote winner will get in as well. So, but I think the intriguing part is going to be the soft tires. And as we've talked about, I love the whole idea that NASCAR is using this as an opportunity for a full-scale test. And as we talked about at the top, we've seen it before. Things that have come out of the All-Star race that have been tested at the All-Star race are now regular parts of what we see every single week. And I think have been improvements to the sport. So we'll see how it plays out.